What's the big idea? I'm Joseph. This is Input English. When it comes to ideas, people have a lot of ideas. Some are better than others. We need to talk about ideas, but as you know, in traditional language learning material, they talk about objects like calculator or pencil. And they talk about simple verbs, run, walk, fly. Now that was necessary because we need that vocabulary, and we pick that up in comprehensible input in the stories and discussions. One of the things I have found lacking as I have studied languages is discussions about ideas, and humans have lots of ideas. We have lots of concepts. I started this episode with the quote, "What's the big idea?" So let's start with that. That actually comes out of the United States, out of cartoons and comic sketches, comedians' work. And it isn't really a discussion of ideas. Basically, if someone says, "What's the big idea?" they're asking, why did someone do something or say something? They're basically asking why, but they've rephrased it as, what's the big idea? It's still used today. It was bolstered by use in advertising, and we could say that most of its popularity came from the work of cartoon makers and comedians. So now that we've gotten that quote out of the way, what about ideas? What are ideas? Well, ideas are human creations. They are things that occur in our brain that allow us to model or create things. There's a related word, a concept. You can use these two words interchangeably. You could refer to something as an idea or a concept. There is a subtle difference between the two, and I'll give you my take on it. I look at an idea as a thought that springs from the mind, and it may not be well developed. It may just be a thought, an idea. But I think of a concept as a little more polished, a little more sophisticated, something that you've thought about a little bit and refined it from the crude form of idea to the more polished form, concept. The difference between these two words is not a big deal, and you're not going to embarrass yourself if you use one versus the other. But if I say, I have an idea, it should give the other person an understanding that I had a thought. Something sprang into my head, and I'm perhaps going to let them know what it is. But if, on the other hand, I tell someone I have a concept of what we should do here, that suggests to them a little more sophistication, a little more polish, and it may be a more thoughtful idea. Now, we share ideas with each other, and when ideas are given and received, there's usually no quarrel that it is an idea. The place it gets interesting is whether someone believes it's a good idea or a bad idea. Now, in yesterday's video, you may remember that I stopped short of labeling the weather outside as good or bad. Because for me, the weather is what it is. It is a natural process. And for me to attach a human value to the weather makes no sense. Yesterday's weather was not conducive to me making videos outdoors. Some people might use the shorthand that yesterday's weather was bad. But as I explained to you, I don't do that. Now, with ideas and concepts, those are human creations. They spring from the human mind. And so I think it is fair game to apply a human value to a human creation. So if somebody has an idea and they share it with me, I listen carefully or look carefully at the idea, recognize that it's an idea, but is it a good idea or is it a bad idea? When people share ideas, sometimes they are making recommendations to other people that they themselves are not following. They're trying to tell other people what to do, but this idea that they are promoting is not consistent with their own behavior. So we have a quote on that you will hear called, "Practice what you preach." That's a common thing that people say when they perceive hypocrisy. Practice what you preach. He doesn't practice what he preaches. That quote comes from the Bible, the New Testament, the book of Matthew. Again, I am not a Bible scholar, but I did know that that was a biblical reference. While we're on the topic of preaching, practice what you preach, what about preaching to the choir? That phrase comes from the United States, comes from Christian churches and congregations, and the experience that the choir is a group of very devoted church members who are already in agreement with what the preacher is saying. And so if the preacher is preaching to the choir, then he is trying to convince someone who is already convinced, or he's trying to inform someone who is already informed. So with that as the origin of the phrase, you will hear someone use preaching to the choir metaphorically if they perceive that the instruction or the thoughts are being given to a very receptive audience who is already on the bandwagon. Sometimes when we discuss ideas, we are making comparisons between two different things, and the listener might discern that the comparison is not a good comparison because the two things being compared are very dissimilar. So they might look at this discussion, this comparison of these two ideas or two concepts as being wrong. So that person, realizing the flaw in the logic, might say, "You're comparing apples to oranges." So where does that come from? Well, the original reference actually read apples to oysters, and that was penned in a book of Proverbs written by John Ray, an Englishman, in 1670. John Ray was a pastor and a naturalist, and he was a fairly prolific writer. Various languages around the world use the same idea of comparing apples to oranges, but the specifics are often changed. For instance, in one language you might hear comparing potatoes to sweet potatoes. In another, comparing bananas to pears. The idea is the same, that is, comparing dissimilar objects and pointing out that a comparison is not appropriate. Well, where do ideas come from? Well, they come from the human mind. And it's a little mysterious where they come from. They come from our experiences, our fears, our emotions, our desires, and they spring from us. It is the great desire of creative people to have lots and lots of ideas. Most creative people realize that their ideas will come out as ideas, and then they have to pick and choose the good ideas and discard the bad ideas. From this process of creating ideas, considering them, refining them, we get a lot of language. We have a lot of language to describe bad ideas. Often people will talk about ideas baking or incubating, developing. When I think of incubating an idea, I'm thinking about refining it, maybe making that journey from idea to concept, where the idea might just be a flash, a thought, and a concept might be a more well thought out package. Sometimes people ruminate on ideas. Ruminate. So there are animals that eat food, typically grasses, and they need to digest that food to get the nutrients out of the food. And there are a lot of animals that we classify in biology as ruminants. That is, they have multi-chambered stomachs, so they eat the food, it gets an initial chewing by the animal, and then it is swallowed into one of the chambers of the stomach. Later, that animal brings that food up from that chamber into the mouth and chews it again. The classic for that is a cow. Cattle are ruminants. And so a cow, a steer, or a bull will graze, take the food in, swallow it, later will perhaps lay down and chew their cud. Chewing the cud is bringing food back up from the stomach and chewing it a second time. It's a normal digestive process for this type of animal, and the process is called rumination. So we use the word rumination metaphorically as if we bring up an old idea and give it another chew, go over it again, process it some more, give it more consideration. For the most part, when we deal with ideas in these ways, letting ideas incubate or bake, or if we ruminate over ideas, these are considered good things in human behavior because in general, this process allows us to discard bad ideas, hopefully, and develop good ideas into more mature concepts. Now, how would we describe bad ideas? Are there some really good ways to do that? Well, the first one comes out of this recent discussion here. We can bake an idea. We can develop it. So what if an idea is half-baked? A half-baked idea is a crude idea that doesn't have any substance. It doesn't have any value. And so if someone says that your idea is half-baked, that's a criticism. Another colorful way to talk about a bad idea is to refer to it as harebrained. As you probably know, a hare is a type of rabbit, and they're not known for their brilliance. And so in this case, the speaker is attributing stupidity to a rabbit and a rabbit's brain, and then attributing that stupidity to the idea. A harebrained idea is a stupid idea. Misbegotten is another way that people describe ideas, concepts, plans. And misbegotten originally referred to children born out of wedlock. An illegitimate child was misbegotten. And so the criticism that an idea is misbegotten is just a general criticism that it is bad. Certainly ideas can be bad ideas. They can be inept, inappropriate, and unworkable. So we've recognized some of the criticism that our ideas might get. How do we make these ideas? If we have an idea, a concept, a project, how can we put it together? Well, some people might refer to a project as being slapped together. And the word slapped together suggests a very casual, thoughtless approach. And this is a criticism of whatever's being discussed. If you just slapped it together, it means you did so with little thought, little preparation, and little attention to the quality. If, on the other hand, you cobble something together, a cobble in probably Middle English, certainly in early modern English, a cobble was a globular lump. A cobblestone used for paving is a globular lump. So if you want to know what a cobble was originally, think of a cobblestone street, globular lumps of stone. When something is cobbled together, it is joined or repaired. So if your project is cobbled together, it suggests that you're bringing a bunch of things together to make this concept. In general, I would prefer something to be cobbled together as opposed to slapped together. The process of coming up with an idea or a concept has been expressed by the verb conceive, and you will hear people talk about something being inconceivable, that is, unthinkable, an idea that could not be. You might hear someone say that the plan was ill-conceived, that is, poorly thought out. And yes, there is a relationship between the word conceived, which is to accept or grasp, and the word concept, which is the thing which is accepted or grasped. These words have the same origin. I think as we acquire languages, we need to have a rich enough understanding of the language and a big enough vocabulary so that we are not relegated to saying things like the dog chased the squirrel or the boy is under the airplane. We want to be able to talk about what humans do, and a big part of human activity is the development of, the refinement of, the discussion of ideas. I invite comments below, and if you like this video, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.